So now let's do the synths for the build. This should honestly be pretty easy. All I like to really do is like just ride the root note out, because I think that'll transition out of the melodic progression that we have into the drop, which is also riding the root note. This will also help build up energy and tension throughout the build. So first what I'm going to do is duplicate over the last 8 bars of this respace, and I'm going to go into the MIDI, and I'm just going to delete all the notes besides the first one, and then just extend this all the way across the 8 bars. So if we listen to that, that sort of change just signals to your brain, if you've heard enough dance music, that like, okay, we're building up, we're getting ready for the drop. So that's all I really want to do. And that's exactly what I'm going to do with the melody. I'm going to turn on our automation lock, because I'm going to duplicate the last 8 bars of the melody, but I don't want to copy the automation over, because we're going to do that entirely differently. And then I'm going to go inside the MIDI clip, and I'm going to delete everything besides the first bar. And then I'm just going to duplicate the notes from the first bar all the way across. So now for the automation. What I want to do is I want to create a sort of rise and fall again, even in the build. So I'm going to go to the auto filter, and for the last bar of verse 1.2, I'm going to make a point and then another point at the beginning of build 1.1. And I'm going to actually filter this down towards the end of the verse. And maybe we won't make it as dramatic, so we'll filter it back down to like 800 or something. And then we'll just start to filter this back up. So by the end of the build, it's fully filtered back up. Okay, and that sounds good, but it starts to really get stagnant towards the beginning of the build. So then what we can do is we can automate the reverb back down over the course of the build. So as it's filtering up, it's also gaining clarity. So that's what I like to do. I like to make things seem like they're far away by filtering them down and adding reverb, and making them seem like they're getting closer to you by filtering up and taking away the reverb. And that sounds good for the first half of the build, but the second half of the build, it just really loses steam. So what we can do is we can actually put some effects on the breakdown synths group. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add a reverb, and then I'll add an auto filter. So for the reverb, we're going to leave the decay as is, and then we're going to bring the dry wet down to 0. Let's make a point at the beginning of build 1.1, and then we can make another point at the end of the build, and we'll take the dry wet up to around 80. And then we can give a little bit of a curve so it washes out more towards the second half of the build up. So that sounds good, but I think what we need to do is add this filter automation. Previously, I've been using a low pass filter, and I've been filtering up and down. This time I want to use a high pass filter, because this is our build up, and we're using risers. So generally we're going in the up direction. We want to keep building up energy and tension. Since it's a high pass filter, we're going to bring the cutoff all the way down to 26. And then we're going to make a point at build 1.1, and then another point at the end of the build. And we can maybe even make a point in the middle. So the high pass will like accelerate a little faster in the second half of the build. And then what we're going to do is we're going to automate the resonance as well. And what we want to do is we want to just make a point like halfway through the build, and then another point at the end of the build, and really just be like raising the resonance as the cutoff is rising. So let's hit this little plus button right here. We can click on the cutoff. So now we can see the frequency of the auto filter and the resonance being automated at the same time. And you know what? Let's even do the same thing with the reverb. So now we can see all 3 automations we did at the same time and how it's going to affect the sound. So the resonance is just being automated a little too high. And that's what I said, like it's going to take a lot of finesse to get these automations right. So let's start by lowering the resonance towards the top, and maybe we'll bring this automation a little bit further back so it starts a bit higher. We can delete that point in the middle for the frequency and make it so the high pass filter is rising a bit quicker. Okay, and that's sounding good. And I think what we can actually do is apply the same filter to our drums. But we're gonna have to adjust this. And I know this isn't part of the synths, but we're at like the end of the buildup process. So I wanna make sure everything is moving like together. So let's expand this, and we'll also bring up our resonance automation as well. Something that I'm hearing real quick is we're bringing in this kick. And I think what we also need to do is add some sidechain. And so we can go ahead and we can copy this sidechain compressor from the bass. And then we'll have to make sure we have MIDI during this section for our sidechain trigger. So let's copy all of the MIDI from our buildup for our kick. And we'll just drag this and copy it for our sidechain trigger. And that's sidechaining way too much. So let's go to the breakdown synths, and we'll just take the ratio down to like 2. Something else I'm just gonna do real quick is just automate the dry wet down over the course of this build, because we're gonna have really quick notes happening for our sidechain trigger. And if we don't automate the dry wet down for the breakdown synths, it's just gonna completely make the synths disappear. So I think we've done everything we need for the verse and the build-up section. So now let's officially listen to it all the way through. Okay, and I love how that sounds. I think it sounds great. I think it transitions the energy nicely. Now what we really need to do is find that pre-drop vocal, get the pre-drop all sorted, and then we'll probably end up taking the vocal and sprinkling it in through the verse, just so when the vocal happens, it's not like popping up out of nowhere.